Thank you very much, Denise, and I'm honored that you wanted me to come back. Let's go right to the New York Public Library. Here we are on Fifth Avenue between 40th and 42nd Streets, and this is the main branch of the New York Public Library, which is now officially called this Stephen A. Schwartzman building. That's kind of a mouthful, so we've abbreviated to SASB. So when I refer to SASB, you know it's this building, and it's got a beautiful classic Beaux-Arts style architecture, which I'll talk more about when we go inside the library. But while we're out here, I want to introduce our beloved library lions. This is Fortitude by 42nd Street and Patience. And you can remember them by 42nd Street, 42, Fortitude, because they are identical twin male lions. Why lions in front of a library? Well, lions were ancient symbols of learning. If you go to the Boston Public Library, they too have library lions, but theirs are on the interior. Who gave them their names? Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, the beloved mayor of New York City during the Depression. And he felt that patience and fortitude were the qualities that New Yorkers would need to get through the hard economic times of the Depression. So he gave them those names and everybody liked them and they've stuck. And they're fitting now during the pandemic. And in fact, Patience and Fortitude have been wearing masks to remind people to be masked and to maintain patience and fortitude until we get through the pandemic. And now let's go inside the library. And you can see here, we're in Astor Hall. That's when you enter from Fifth Avenue, that's where you are. It's considered the first floor of the library, but they use the European system. So there's a ground floor with the entrance on 42nd Street. Now here you see Lego replicas of Patience and Fortitude. They now live in the Children's Center, but this picture was taken during the centennial of the library in 2011. And in honor of the centennial, the library commissioned from a sculptor known as the brick artist, these Lego replicas of Patience and Fortitude. So Astor Hall may remind you of another great New York City landmark, Grand Central Terminal. In fact, the library was completed in 2011 and Grand Central Terminal in 2013. And in those early days, people got mixed up. They'd rush into Astor Hall, run over to the information desk, which is off screen, and say, what track is my train leaving on? And this was understandable. If you've been in the Great Hall of Grand Central Terminal, you may notice the resemblance. These are two of the great masterpieces of the Beaux-Arts style of architecture. What is Beaux-Arts style? Well, the term comes from the École des Beaux-Arts, or the School of Fine Arts, where most of the leading architects of the 19th century studied, including the architects of the library and Grand Central. And what are its characteristics? Well, it's a neoclassical style. It looks back to the architecture of ancient Greece and Rome. And you see here pillars that may remind you of the Roman temples. It has a vaulted ceiling, arched windows, and these pediments over the door known as well, triangles over the door known as pediments. And these are all features of classical style. The main feature of classical style was symmetry. The ancients believed that all beauty came from harmony and balance. And so there's symmetry. We see here matching candelabra, both in the front and the back of Astor Hall. And there are two sweeping staircases, the other is off screen. Again, everything, all good things come in pairs in the library, and you can watch for that as we go on the virtual tour. Now, of course, the library is more than just a beautiful building. I like to say the New York Public Library is the world's greatest tuition-free university. Because anybody from anywhere in the world or even another planet can walk through these doors, go into any reading room in the library, and on the spot get a library card, a temporary library card that will give them access to the millions of books in the SASB collection. Now, you can't take the books out of the library because it's not a circulating library, it's a research library only, but it's a pretty good deal because if you borrow a book and nobody else requests it, every time you use the book in the Rosemain reading room, they will give you an additional 7 days. I've read whole novels in this library. Now, also, the library is an outstanding example of democracy in action. And there's something special here in Astor Hall that illustrates that. You see, of these marble squares, this one stands out because it's framed in a special black marble, and there's writing inside, which I'm going to read to you. But first, let me tell you what it's all about. It's a tribute to a man named Martin Radke. He's not a household name unless you've been on the library tour. I wouldn't expect you to recognize it. But Martin Radke in 1910 was a penniless immigrant in Lithuania, a young man, and he decided, as many people then and now do, to come to the New World and make his fortune here. He did not speak much English, but he did have gardening skills, so he was able to get a job as a gardener on Long Island, New York, and within time he improved his English so that when the library opened in 1911, he was able to come in and, with the help of our wonderful research librarians, he gave himself a crash course in economics and finance. And Martin Radke was a brilliant student. He became a successful Wall Street investor. And when he died in 1973, he'd never married or had children, and he left his entire estate to the New York Public Library. This was an estate of $368,000, which in today's money would make him a millionaire. Now, the trustees of the library hadn't been previously aware of Martin Radke, but they were so moved both by his bequest and the words in his will that they decided to create this square as a tribute and put his own words inside, which I'm going to read to you. He said, "I had little opportunity for formal education as a young man in Lithuania, and I am deeply indebted to the New York Public Library for the opportunity to educate myself. In appreciation, I've given the library my estate with the wish that it be used so that others can have the same opportunity made available to me." And that, in a nutshell, is what the New York Public Library is all about. Our mission is to inspire lifelong learning, to advance knowledge, and to strengthen our communities. And I want to thank you all for coming on this virtual tour and supporting the mission in that way. Now, we're going to now continue on the tour, and we're getting another view of Astor Hall, partly so that you can see the beautiful Christmas tree, which attracts many tourists in its own right. Because of the school break, this is our busiest time with as many as 30,000 visitors in one day. On average, it's usually more like 13,000 visitors. But I chose this picture because I wanted a close-up of these pylons. The library has a great attitude of gratitude and engraves the names of benefactors on the pylons and honors them in various other ways. But on this pylon, we have the original benefactors of the library. And there are four that we consider the founding fathers of the New York Public Library. And their names are Astor, Lennox, Tilden, and Carnegie. I don't have time to give you detailed information, but I'll give you a kind of capsule information. Astor and Lennox were men who created our first free research libraries in New York City. We think of libraries as places that invite people in, but originally they were places designed to keep people out. The very first library in New York was the New York Society Library, which still exists on East 79th Street. And then and now you have to pay a membership fee to belong to that library. Now, most people in the 19th century could not afford to join a library, so they were excluded. But Astor and Lennox realized that poor scholars really needed access to information. So these were kind of semi-public libraries because not everybody could use them. The hours were deliberately made unfriendly to working people. The Astor Library opened in 1854. Lennox Library was later in 1877, but they were a step up because important research and collections were made available. And there were some ordinary people, including women, who used these libraries. But they weren't true public libraries. So then Samuel J. Tilden, who was a former progressive governor of New York State and unsuccessful presidential candidate, shared the dream of many New Yorkers of the Gilded Age of having a true public library, one that would have the prestigious research component comparable to the great libraries of Europe, but that would also allow access to anybody with a centralized location, hours that were friendly to working people, and an adult lending library as well as a children's center. Now, because he had no direct descendants, Tilden decided he would leave his entire $7 million+ estate for the founding of a New York Public Library. With the Astor and Lennox contributions, this would suffice. And the Astor and Lennox libraries had been failing financially by the end of the century. So in 1895, they consolidated under the name New York Public Library, Astor, Lennox, and Tilden Foundations, which is still the official name of the library today. Now, there was one thing Tilden hadn't foreseen. He had nieces and nephews who contested the will. And long story short, the New York Public Library Fund only ended up with a fraction of the Tilden estate. There were other generous donors, but it wasn't enough. Libraries, I'll be honest with you, are high maintenance institutions. However, I hope by the end of the tour, you'll agree with me that they are absolutely the best investment a democratic society can make in itself. Now, at this point, the trustees of the foundation had a genius idea. They went to the elected officials of the city of New York and said, will you form with us a unique public-private partnership to create the New York Public Library? And the politicians were thrilled to be part of this prestigious project, and they said, yes, we will. And the trustees said, that's great, because you own the land where we want to put the library. And it was the spot where SASB still exists, adjacent to Bryant Park on 5th Avenue between 40th and 42nd Streets. Bryant Park was already there. The trustees agreed with the philosopher Cicero that if you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need. So Bryant Park was the garden. Now they just had to build the library. There was one small glitch because there was already a building on the spot, but it wasn't really a problem because it was the Croton Distributing Reservoir, which hadn't been used in years. The city had already moved the water system. So it was just a question of tearing down the reservoir and building the library. Now for this, they needed an architect, and they held a competition. And here you see the winners of the competition, which was held in 1897. This is John Mervyn Carrere, the bronze bust over here. And then on my right is the marble bust of his partner, Thomas Hastings. These busts are in the library. I mean, I've put them together, but if you come into Astor Hall and you go up the staircase on your right, you'll see an alcove on the landing with the bust of Carrere, and on the left, and this was actually by a famous sculptor, Frederick McManus, who also did some sculptures on the outside of the library, Thomas Hastings. Now, their winning the competition was a big surprise to everybody. The leading architectural firm of the day was McKim, Mead and White. They were not only the architects of Columbia University, but they just built the Boston Public Library to great esteem, to great acclaim. So everybody expected that this esteemed firm was going to be the architects of the library. But surprise, it was like an upset night at the Oscars. Carrere and Hastings upstaged their own former employer. And what made it particularly surprising was they were the least well-known of the established architects who'd entered the competition. But they had met as students at the École des Beaux-Arts. They had trained under McKim, Mead and White for 3 years, and then decided to form their own firm and go off on their own. Now, Hastings' father was a very well-connected society minister, so immediately his parishioners and wealthy friends became their first clients, and they designed some lovely luxurious homes for the wealthy. But they were idealists. They belonged to a movement called the City Beautiful movement. And although I don't think anybody in the City Beautiful movement was familiar with the concept of feng shui, it wasn't, in fact, they shared a central organizing principle, mainly that we're all very influenced by the energies of our environment. So they believed that not only would you make people feel good by building beautiful public buildings, but you'd also inspire them to do good, and it was a way of promoting civic virtue. So Carrere and Hastings were thrilled to get the library as their first major civic commission, and they set out to build what they called the People's Palace, which is still the nickname of SASB today. Now, it takes time to build a palace. It took 12 years to create this library. First, it took 500 workers 2 years just to dismantle the reservoir, and then another 10 years to construct the building at a cost of $9.2 million. And by the way, the land that the city so generously donated was at the time estimated valued at $20 million. In today's money, that would be like $500 million. So the city was very generous, and they have actually engraved on one of the pylons that the city of New York has erected this building to be maintained as a free library for the use of the people. So finally, in 1911, on May 23rd, 1911, which was exactly 16 years to the day after the consolidation of the Library Foundation, they had a dedication ceremony. And this was such a big deal that the President of the United States himself, William Howard Taft at the time, came to perform the dedication. And he talked about the national and historic importance of the New York Public Library, where everybody, no matter what his origins or his socioeconomic status, would have access to all knowledge. And as Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. So the next day, the library opened to the public for the first time, and an estimated 50,000 visitors streamed in that first day. Very impressive for the 19th century, when not only was the world less populous, but transportation wasn't as good. And perhaps even more impressive, the first book was delivered to the first patron in under 7 minutes. So New York City had arrived on the cultural map with a state-of-the-art, world-class public library. And I say state-of-the-art because this was one of the first buildings in New York to have both elevators and electric lights. Now the library goes on evolving, and in a minute I'm going to talk about this newest part of the library, the South Court building. But first I want to let you know that although it's still the jewel in the crown architecturally, SASB is now one of 92 individual New York public libraries. 4 of them are research libraries. SASB is the central research library for the humanities and social sciences. We also have a library for the performing arts up at Lincoln Center. The third is the Schomburg Center for Black Culture in Harlem. And beneath the Schomburg Center are the ashes of the great Black poet Langston Hughes, who by his own request was cremated and buried under the Schomburg Center. Finally, there's the Sybil Library, SIBL, which stands for Science, Industry, and Business Library. And that used to be in the old B. Altman building on Madison Avenue, but now it has moved into the Stavros Niarchos Library, which is the largest of the circulating libraries. There are 88 circulating libraries, and the Stavros Niarchos Library, which used to be known as the Mid-Manhattan Library, is actually across the street from SASB and half a block south at 5th Avenue and 40th Street. So now there's a business center, and Sybil has moved into that building, which was supposed to open with a big gala on May 17th, but the pandemic has kind of changed things. So the other 87 branches are scattered, and they were the gift of Andrew Carnegie. This is why he is the 4th founding father. He is the founding father of the circulating libraries, because in 1901, he donated $5.2 million, and that seated the first 37 of the circulating libraries. And so now SASB no longer needs an adult lending library. Instead, the branch libraries perform that function. Now, they're only in 3 of the boroughs of New York City. The NYPL branches are in Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx. Why not Brooklyn and Queens? Well, they were invited in 1895 to join the New York Public Library, but the city of New York wasn't incorporated until the year 1898, and Brooklyn and Queens hadn't been waiting around. They had developed their own independent library systems. And when people have independence, they don't give it up lightly. So they said, no, thank you. And they're still saying it today. Brooklyn and Queens both have major library systems of their own, but they're not part of the New York Public Library. There is some interlibrary cooperation, but you can't take a book out of an NYPL branch library with a Brooklyn or Queens card. However, the good news is if you live anywhere in New York State or work anywhere in New York State, not just the city, but the state, you can get a card for the circulating libraries of the New York Public Library, and anybody can use the research libraries. So the library goes on evolving. And as I said before, we're seeing now the South Court building, which was built in 2001 in what had been a grassy courtyard, the South Courtyard. Now, originally, people would tie up their horses when that was the major form of transportation in the South Courtyard and then come into the library to work. Over time, it had other purposes. At one point, there was a general store for the employees in the South Courtyard. But by the 20th century, it was really just dead space. Our far-seeing librarians knew that a digital revolution was coming and they wanted to be prepared. So the library hired the architects Davis, Brady, and Bond to build the South Court building, which housed the library's first digital learning labs, as well as classrooms. What we're seeing here are staff offices. On the concourse level, there's an auditorium where they have many wonderful public programs. And here I always show visitors on the tour, Davis, Brody, and Bond deliberately left open part of the foundation they had excavated so visitors can see that Career and Hastings incorporated some of the reddish gray stones from the Croton Reservoir in the library's foundation in order to honor and acknowledge its previous heritage. Now we're going to go down the north-south corridor toward the periodical room. And you can see that the marble here is a little different from the marble in Astor Hall. That marble was stark white it's actually got black veins running through. And it is the same marble that's used on the outside of the building, which has a marble facing a foot thick. It's a white Vermont marble, and Career and Hastings let the quarries at Dorset and Danby, Vermont know that they only wanted to see their very finest white marble, and only the very finest was sent. But the architects were so fastidious that they rejected 65% of this finest marble. And we don't need to feel too sorry for the rejected marble because it did find its way into many other distinguished buildings, including Harvard Medical School. But Career and Hastings were impressed. They said, well, it may be good enough for Harvard. It is not good enough for the People's Palace. We only want the best of the best. And this marble is what they considered the absolute creme de la creme. It is a golden pentalic marble that is identical to the marble in the Parthenon Temple in Athens, the great temple of classical learning. And we feel fortunate to have it because that quarry is now depleted and you can't get this marble anymore. Now notice also the beautiful light fixtures. These are the original light fixtures, but this little rim of lights was added because the gorgeous windows on either side in 1911 let a lot of light stream in so that the message of the library was as it should be, let there be light. But then sadly, the skyscrapers went up and started blocking that light. And Hastings and Career had foreseen that. They deliberately put the library on a terrace so that at least some of the effect of the skyscrapers would be mitigated. And later in life, Thomas Hastings had the nickname the foe of skyscrapers because he hated the tall buildings. But the library is trying to find ways to brighten it up, and one way was to add these lights. Now, next, let's look at the ceiling. I ask people on the tour what they think the ceiling is made of, and they usually say wood or sometimes copper, and that's exactly what the architects wanted you to think. However, it is molded plaster that's been stained to look like wood and painted with a special gold paint that gives this coppery effect. Even in the Rosemain Reading Room, that beautiful coffered ceiling with its 900 ornaments is molded plaster. We only have one real wood ceiling in the library. It's in Gottesman Hall, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. But why didn't they use wood everywhere? Well, remember, there had been a reservoir here. The ground was damp, and the architects were afraid that over time the ceilings might warp and their artistry would be lost forever. So they love the challenge of creating these faux wood ceilings, which are as beautiful as the real thing. Now here we are in the periodical room. This is where you come to get the most requested English and foreign language periodicals. So you can get Paris Match as well as the New York Times. Of course, these days, the thousands of periodicals often exist in electronic form as well as or instead of hard copy. Now, what do you do if you want older periodicals? You go up to the Rosemain Reading Room. Either they will bring up the older material from the stacks, or they'll send you to room 119, the microfilm room, if it's on microfilm. This room is named after DeWitt Wallace. It's the DeWitt Wallace Periodical Room, and he was the founder of the Reader's Digest magazine. And the Reader's Digest magazine was actually born in this very room. DeWitt Wallace and his wife Lila lived in Greenwich Village in the 1920s. On their way to work, they'd stop in the New York Public Library periodical room and read the various periodicals. And one day, DeWitt Wallace realized that nobody had time or money enough to read all the best articles because they weren't just in 2 or 3 publications, but scattered across hundreds. So he proposed to Lila that they copy the best articles, edit them so they'd all fit into one volume, and call it the Reader's Digest. And they did just that for the first 3 years of its existence. That's how the Reader's Digest was created. And of course, it was a huge hit. When I was growing up in the 1950s, every doctor's waiting room in America had a copy of the Reader's Digest, and it was second sales only to the Bible. So when they became wealthy, the Wallaces created a philanthropic foundation. And when this room needed renovation in the early 1980s, the DeWitt Wallace Foundation paid for the entire renovation. And so the name of the room was given after his generosity. And one thing the foundation did was they commissioned a living artist, Richard Haas, known for his architectural paintings, to create these murals. So when you come into this periodical room, it's like stepping back in time to the heyday of the New York publishing industry. All of these buildings represent buildings from the publishing industry. You may recognize this was the iconic New York Times building that stood in Times Square for many years. It does look a bit like the Flatiron building. All the original book publishers are represented in their original buildings. This was what's now HarperCollins, but then was Harper and Brothers down on Pearl Street. And over here we have Herald Square, where they published the New York Evening Herald. And there are also some magazine buildings represented, the Puck Building, the Time Life Building. And Haas used a technique known as trompe l'oeil, which means fool the eye. So that when you're in the room, you actually feel as if these buildings are coming down off the wall at you. It's very impressive. And although we can't see it very well, the seal of the city of New York is carved into the side of these pedestals. And that's true in the Rosemain Reading Room as well. Those have higher tables, so you can see it better. But everything here was designed by Carrere and Hastings. Now, on the other side, there's a doorway like this, made out of a beautiful gray Formosa marble from Germany. And over it, there's a little painting of a pink building that was the Reader's Digest building near Pleasantville, New York. And when you go through that, you're in the Dorot collection. Now, the library has what it calls its special collections grouped around a theme or a geographical region, and the rest of them are on the 3rd floor of the library. But the Dorot collection is on the 1st floor through an open doorway. And although, with the exception of the art and architecture collection, which is a public collection, the others, they're all private. But because of the open doorway, the libraries are very indulgent about letting people pop their heads in and kind of look at the room while the researchers are doing their work. Now, what is the Dorot collection? Well, Dorot is a Hebrew word meaning generations. And this is the library's outstanding collection of Hebraica and Judaica. It was originally, the core collection was donated by the Schiff family in 1897. It is now maintained and added to by the Dorot Foundation, and that's where the name comes from. It's about 40% in the Hebrew language, most of the modern languages represented, as well as Yiddish and Ladino. And to give you an idea of the collection, on the scholarly side, they have the oldest Hebrew prayer book published in the United States for the use of the Harvard Divinity School students. And on the popular side, they have Winnie the Pooh and Sherlock Holmes in Yiddish, recipes for bagels. They have some beautiful artworks, including some priceless illuminated ketubot or wedding certificates. So now we're going to go down the hall to Gottesman Hall, which is one of 2 exhibition galleries in the library. The other one, which is much smaller, is the Wachenheim Gallery, which is directly across from South Court. And that used to be the USO book canteen during World War II. Now it's an exhibition gallery. Gottesman Hall, when the library is going to reopen to the public in late September. That's the plan for now. And right now, SASB is only available in a limited way to researchers by appointment only. But you can keep checking the website, for updates. With the pandemic, everything is fluid. But the plan now is to reopen in September. And you will see Gottesman Hall transformed because they have put in an exhibit called Treasures of the New York Public Library that will be a permanent exhibit. And now, once again, visitors can see the the Gutenberg Bible, which is the New York Public Library owns the first Gutenberg Bible brought to the United States by Samuel Lennox of the Lennox Library, and it had been behind closed doors in the rare book room, but now it will be out on permanent display along with other treasures of the library that people are eager to see. And they'll probably be rotated. There'll be some change, but some things like the Bible will just live here permanently. Now, as I mentioned, this has the one wood ceiling, real wood ceiling in the library. It's a beautiful carved oak ceiling in the Renaissance style by a famous sculptor of the day, Maurice Greaves. And it's also, as you can see, a beautiful room with a lot of marble, and so it's been used for private parties. I don't know with the new treasures exhibit if that will continue to be the case, but there are other beautiful rooms for parties as well. Now we go to the map room. As you can see, the layout is similar to the layout of the periodical room, but it's got its own unique faux wood ceiling with there's some green and red in here. And this is one of the five, considered one of the five most outstanding map collections in the world. It's used by the media and the military, as well as people like ourselves. It is a public reading room. You may go in here and research your own property or anything else, and it's worth a visit. They have over 500,000 sheet maps, about 20,000 books and atlases, and all kinds of interesting globes, including this one on which New York City no longer exists. So many people have walked over to this ginormous globe, put their finger on the spot and said, here we are in New York City, that now there's just a shiny white spot where New York City used to be. They have every kind of map you can imagine. From once I was doing a private tour with Lyndon Johnson's great-granddaughter and her dad, and she was very interested in astronomy. So the librarian brought out some valuable antique maps that show the constellations of the stars. And they also have the latest edition of the Homes of the Stars in Beverly Hills. The strength of the collection, as you might expect, is in New York City maps from the times of the early Dutch settlements. They have beautiful hand-drawn 400-year-old maps of early New York to the present, and you can actually take a copy of the latest subway map out of the map room. Now, down a long corridor across from the map room, we come to room 121. And again, this is a public room, and it's the Milstein division of US history, local history, and genealogy. And it's unique in the library in that it has open stacks. Now, it's not a circulating library. You can't take these books out, but unlike in other rooms, you don't have to fill out a call slip. You can actually just take a book off the shelf, sit down at the table, and read to your heart's content. And they have both scholarly and popular works of history. It's also one of the major genealogy centers and free of charge. You can use Ancestry.com and not have to pay a fee for that. And better yet, you can have a free appointment with a research librarian trained in genealogy who can help you navigate the birth and death indexes, ship's manifests from Ellis Island, and other records of your ancestors who arrived in America. Okay, now we're going down to the ground floor, and we're in the Children's Center, and you may recognize these critters. It's Winnie the Pooh and friends, and they have lived in the Children's Center of the New York Public Library, but I believe they are moving into the Treasures exhibit. As you can see, the library has painted the 100-acre wood behind them, so they'll feel right at home. Now, how did they come to live in the New York Public Library? It's a bit of a sad story. When he grew up, Christopher Robin, the son of A. Milne, who wrote the Winnie the Pooh books, became estranged from his father and felt that he had been exploited in the Winnie the Pooh books. So the animals were painful reminders, and he gave them to his publisher, E.P. Dutton, who happily donated to the library, where many visitors like ourselves who cherished Winnie as part of our childhoods can come and say hello. They're all here except for Roo. Apparently, the Milnes went on a picnic, Rue fell out of Kanga's pouch and was never seen again, but the rest of them are here, and Piglet is my favorite. The Children's Center also it's the only circulating library within the library. Now, I think it may be moving to Stavros Niarchos, so there may not continue to be a circulating library. But this was the situation when the pandemic started, and the Children's Library has over 47,000 books and other items for children up to the age of 11. Okay, then we go to the second floor, and most of the rooms on the second floor are not available to the public. They're dedicated for writers and scholars and research purposes. But there is this open area in the center known as the Jill Cup and Rose Gallery, where they have special exhibits and a kind of permanent exhibit of, I mean, this is a special exhibit on immigration, but they also have an exhibit on the library, which includes artifacts, pictures of people that I mentioned on the tour. I mean, it's a great supplement to the tour to get a better sense of what the New York Public is all about. And they also have pictures and artifacts from some of the branch libraries as well. Another way to supplement the tour is the library shows a free 20-minute film continuously all day long called Inside the New York Public Library, narrated by our president and CEO, Tony Marks. And they are, you could see the treasures before they were on permanent display. At least you could see them in the film. So now we go to the third floor, and when you step off the third floor elevator, you see the Berg collection. By the way, the library is now under renovation. They're putting in a new elevator and finally a public bathroom on the first floor and all that. So there will be another elevator, but this one will then be refurbished, which it badly needs. And when you step off it, this is what you see, because there's a glass door on the Berg collection. This is one of the special collections, but because of the glass door, you can get a sense of what it's all about. Now, it is one of the finest collections of British and American literature in the world. It's my favorite collection, I have to say. And it was the gift of the man in this painting. He's Dr. Albert Berg, and he gave it in loving memory of his brother, Dr. Henry Berg, who was considerably older and helped to raise Albert. And the Berg brothers were interesting. They were physicians at Mount Sinai Hospital. They also were very successful speculators in real estate, and they were bachelors who lived together all of Henry's life. And with their real estate earnings, they indulged their mutual passion for rare books. So when Henry died, Albert bought 2 other rare book collections and then donated all 3 wonderful collections to the New York Public Library. They've gone on adding to the Berg collection today. They have the finest collections of both Virginia Woolf and W.H. Auden, but it really goes from the 15th century to the present with just all kinds of real treasures, especially because the Berg brothers' favorite author was Charles Dickens. Not only does the library have the original manuscript of one of Dickens' great masterpieces, Bleak House, but all of Dickens' personal copies of his books, known as the prompt copies that he edited, we have his handwriting in these books, where he gave dramatic readings, and he knew that when you give a dramatic reading, it's a little different from reading a book on the page. So he made some changes to make the dramatic readings more effective, and those are known as the prompt copies. And at Christmas time, the prompt copy of A Christmas Carol is the focal point of a special Christmas display. But this is some of his furniture. They have some of Dickens' belongings as well as his book material, and his calendars open to the day he died, a special letter opener, the lamp, everything except the flower belonged to Dickens, including the desk and the chair. Now, this is a cane chair. The Berg collection was dedicated in 1940, and Mayor LaGuardia performed the dedication and sat in the Dickens chair. Now, if you've ever seen pictures of Mayor LaGuardia, you know he was a rather portly man, and midway through the dedication, the entire bottom of the cane chair fell through. So the library had it recaned, but from that day forward, nobody, not even the currently very petite curator of the Berg collection, gets to sit in the Dickens chair. It's strictly for viewing only. So now we go down a long corridor past other special collections behind closed doors. One of them, the Forsheimer collection, does have a glass door, and you can peer at that. We don't have time right now, so we're just going to go into McGraw Hill, the McGraw Rotunda, named after the McGraw Hill publisher, but it's not really a rotunda. Rotunda should be a perfect circle, and as you can see, there are squarish corners, so I say it's rotunda-ish. And this is where you go. On the other side is the door to the Rosemain Reading Room, but first you have to go through the Bill Blass catalog room, and we'll get there eventually, but let's stop here for a minute. You notice these paintings. These were not here in 1911 when the library opened its doors originally. They were all added during the Great Depression. As you know, during the Depression, many people were unemployed, and we had a special agency, the WPA, or Works Progress Administration, to give work to the unemployed. And that included artists. The Federal Art Project commissioned artists to decorate public buildings. And the lucky artist that got this commission was named Edward Lanning Jr. And he was so grateful that he actually painted a thank you note in this mural. This is a thank you note addressed to a man who was both a trustee of the library and a head honcho in the WPA. And not only did he get the commission for Lanning, but because he was a wealthy man out of his own pocket, Isaac Newton Phelps Stokes paid for all the expensive artist material, the oil paints, the canvas, the brushes, etc. So I think it speaks well of Lanning, although he wasn't a great artist, that he immortalized his gratitude. And the murals tell a great story. There are two on the other side, and the four murals tell the history of the recorded word in the West, beginning with Moses bringing the stone tablets down from Mount Sinai containing the 10 Commandments. The second one is of a medieval monk copying a manuscript. Over here, this mural celebrates the Gutenberg Bible. It shows Johannes Gutenberg proudly holding up the first Gutenberg Bible to show his patron, the Elector of Mainz, Germany. And Gutenberg invented movable metal type in the West. Now, it had already been invented in Korea several hundred years before, and before that in China they had movable type made of porcelain, but Gutenberg didn't know that. So this was his independent invention and made possible printed books and made reading something that all of us could do. We owe him a great debt. He went bankrupt in the effort, but he enriched the world for the ages. Now here we have a celebration of another invention, the linotype machine, which made possible the mass circulation newspaper, also very important. And this is Ottmar Mergenthaler, who was the inventor of the linotype machine. And the man reading the newspaper was a famous newspaper editor of the day, James Whitelaw Reid. Now, today we'd have to have a mural to the internet, but there really isn't room for it. So it's just as well that there were no computers and internets then. But Lanning did paint two beautiful lunettes over the door. The one we can't see that goes in the Bill Blass catalog room shows a mother reading to her son, young son, about maybe 7 years old, maybe not that old even, 5 or 6. And it's called Learning to Read. And this one shows a young man reading to himself. And we library docents have decided that this young man is supposed to be that little boy grown up, and that Lanning had a message for parents. Read to your children so they grow up to be readers. Now we're going to go in through this door. On both sides, the doorways are framed in this beautiful rose-colored marble. It's called Rouge Jaspe. It's from the south of France, and it's one of the costliest marbles that's used in the library. Whoop. Oh, I'm pressing in the wrong place. Okay, here we are. This is the Edna Barnes Solomon room. And as you can see, they're holding a party here. The library is still a public-private partnership. It is not like the Library of Congress, a government library funded completely by the government. As in the early days, the funding is about 50% from the private sector, 50% from government. But the way it breaks down is the circulating libraries are mainly funded by government, and the research libraries mainly by private contributions, both individual contributions, corporate donors, and they hold weddings and parties to raise money, and the Solomon Room is used for that purpose. By day, it's a public reading room, like all the reading rooms wired for Wi-Fi, and it's also the library's official picture gallery. As you can see, it's arranged like a 19th century picture gallery. We have portraits of George Washington, not by the famous Gilbert Stuart, but by his then equally famous contemporary Rembrandt Peale. And there are actually some Gilbert Stuart portraits of the Lennox family. A lot of the paintings here are portraits of the Lennox and Astor families, but there are also some famous painters like Sir Joshua Reynolds, and among the more recent contributions, Truman Capote not only donated all his papers to the library, but also a very nice portrait of himself. So now we're going on the other side to the Bill Blass catalog room. People get up to the third floor looking for the reading room and often go to the information desk in a panic and say, I can't find the Rosemain reading room. Where is it? Well, it's hidden. It's behind the catalog room. And I'll tell you another secret. There are actually two Rosemain reading rooms. There's an identical North Hall and South Hall. Remember that classical principle of symmetry. They balance each other, but it's also a very efficient way to deliver books because the librarians just can turn around from the book delivery center and serve patrons on both sides simultaneously. But first we go through the catalog room. Now you may recognize the name Bill Blass. He was a noted fashion designer and also a trustee of the library, who very generously in 1994 gave what had been the biggest donation to date of $10 million. Now Stephen A. Schwartzman has eclipsed that with $100 million, but in recognition of Blass's generosity, the catalog room is named after him. What you don't see in the catalog room anymore is the old-fashioned card catalog with the wooden boxes and little cards. I used them as a student, and they do still have old-fashioned card catalogs in both the periodical room and the Berg room. But here they've been replaced by these desktop computers. Now, if you want to use a library, a computer in the library, happily that's another free service, but we have laptops, which you can use for 45 minutes at a time free of charge. These computers can only serve two functions. You can surf the catalog of the New York Public Library, get the call slip number, the call number of the book that you want to request, and fill out their little wooden boxes with call slips next to each computer, or you can use a special app to request a library card. Now, when you get to the end of the hall, you can see over the door, and the carving is so beautiful. These are some typical Beaux-Arts decorations, the rosettes, which symbolize beauty, and the ubiquitous acanthus leaves, which symbolize immortality. And then they have a quote from the poet John Milton here. A good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life. I like to say John Milton is kind of the patron saint of the New York Public Library. This is not a quote from Paradise Lost, but from his famous defense of free speech, the Areopagitica, and the library has a rare first edition of that Areopagitica, which is sometimes on display. Perhaps it will be in the treasures collection, I hope so. But you may have noticed the white marble bust of Milton in the Berg collection. Now, here on the way to the Rosemain Reading Room, we passed the book delivery system. This was completed in 2016 to expedite book delivery. And it's sort of like a roller coaster with these tracks that spiral down into these stacks. And each of these little red cars can hold up to 30 pounds of books. They can tip over and the books don't tip out. And then where do they go? Well, they go down to Bryant Park. That's where the stacks are now located, under that grassy lawn, which becomes a skating rink. In the winter are 80 miles of book stacks in two tiers, 40 miles each. And that's where the books are housed. And they actually make 4 other stops before they come to the main reading room. Now, originally, the books were kept in the library's own stacks. Now, these stacks are still there. As you can see, they hold up the Rosemain Reading Room. They're very important architecturally, but they no longer hold books in the shelves, except temporarily when they're setting up an exhibit. They use it as swing space, they call it. But as you can see, there are windows in these stacks. And by the 20th century, they realized if you don't climate control stacks, the older material especially will deteriorate fairly quickly. So it would not have been cost effective to try to climate control these stacks. It was a better idea to start from scratch under Bryant Park and create the new stacks. Someday, I think they will find an amazing, innovative use for the original stacks. Now we finally get to the pièce de résistance, the Rosemain Reading Room. It is the size of an American football field or two very long city blocks. And when I say the Rosemain Reading Room, I mean both Rosemain Reading Rooms, and about 540 people can sit at these desks at one time. Here you can see this is the book delivery system back here. There are about 50,000 books between the catalog room and the Rosemain Reading Room. And there are things like reference encyclopedias or topical reference books that you can actually just take the books off the shelves yourselves, but not on the second level. The libraries have to go up, librarians have to go up to the mezzanine if you request something from there. Now, off screen, if you go to the very end of this is the South Hall where visitors go, you come to room 300, which is the Art and Architecture Library. There's swinging brown doors, you can go right through. And the Art and Architecture Library is worth a visit. They have over 600,000 items of everything to do with applied and fine art, including original fashion sketches, auction catalogs, and all other interesting materials. There's also on the first floor a wonderful picture archive, which I don't have time to talk to you about now, but is also worth a visit. Now, in the Rosemain Reading Room, as you may know, both the Rosemain Reading Room and the Bill Blass Catalog Room were closed for 2 whole years because there was an accident here. You see these rosettes? Well, this one came crashing down, luckily at 2 a.m., so nobody was injured. But this was in May 2014, and it went between the tables, so happily even the furniture wasn't badly damaged. But it was a warning. They suddenly realized that these 900 ornaments had been glued on the ceiling with the very best glue of the day in 1911, but after 100 years, even the very best glue starts to dry up. So the rooms were sealed off for the safety of the public. An engineering firm came in to do an evaluation, and they said, forget glue, we're going to have to bolt everything to the ceiling. So they had to take everything down, custom make cables like aircraft cables, and then individually bolt everything back. And because this was highly skilled work, it took 2 years, but now it's safe as well as gorgeous. We don't have to worry like Chicken Little that the sky may be falling. But speaking of the sky, notice the sky. What is the sky doing on the ceiling of the New York Public Library? You may have noticed it also in the Bill Blass Catalog Room. And happily, while it was closed for the repairs, they did some cleaning up and they restored these beautiful paintings. The original ones were created by James Wall Finn of the Tiffany Studios. I had the thrill of having one of his descendants on a tour once, but those deteriorated over time, and the Evergreen Studio has done a beautiful job of reproducing them. But I still haven't answered the question, why the morning sky? This was one of many innovations by the remarkable first director of the New York Public Library, Dr. Billings. And he was originally a medical doctor, a surgeon during the Civil War, and then an eminent medical librarian. His medical index is still used today. And then as the first director of the New York Public Library, he actually, if you go to that gallery on the second floor, you can see a facsimile of a sketch he drew on a postcard of this is what a library should look like. And Carrera and Hastings followed that exactly. So the biggest innovation was that the reading room was on the 3rd floor. Usually the first thing in the 19th century, you walked into a library and the reading room was right there. And Dr. Billings said, that's all wrong. He said it should be as far as possible from the street, the noise, the dust, the heat. And he wanted the morning sky so that people could look up, feel as if they were looking straight into the heavens and become inspired. So we're coming to the end of the tour now, but before I end, I want you to know, you all know that the library is a great place of scholarship. The New York Public Library is renowned as a venue of scholarship, but it is also, you may not know, a venue of romance. Now, when we were in the McGraw Rotunda, some of you may have recognize that from the movie Sex and the City. That's where Carrie Bradshaw waited in her wedding gown for Mr. Big to come and marry her in the library. Sadly, he didn't show up and they ended up getting married elsewhere. But actually, one of the biggest sources of income from the library is weddings. Most of us can't afford to be married in the New York Public Library, but the good news is anybody can get their wedding pictures taken in any room in the library or on the steps. And I frequently see that. And we also have a special tour known as the Lovebird Tour, because the library gets requests. I'd like to propose in the library. Is that possible? So the couple is given their own dedicated docent, and they finish the tour in the Lovebird corner of the New York Public Library here in the Rosemain Reading Room, where proposals can be made. And one enterprising young man, actually, he got the library's permission to make a fake book. It looked like there are in the Lovebird corner green encyclopedias that have a binding similar to these. So he had a fake encyclopedia volume made. It was hollow inside, and he filled it with pictures of himself and his fiancée. When he got there, he disingenuously withdrew it from the shelf, said, "What have we here?" and then began to reminisce with her through the photos, went down on one knee, and of course was accepted at once. Now, to my knowledge, nobody's ever been turned down on a tour of the New York Public Library, a Lovebird tour. So if you're thinking of proposing or know anybody who is, please keep that in mind. And then a final thing I want to tell you is, if you ever have any questions, not just about the library, but about anything, one of the great resources of the New York Public Library is a free telephone reference service. You just call 917 ask NYPL. I am enumerate and can't give you the numbers, but remember the letters, ask NYPL. If you go to our website at nypl.org, they can give you the numbers. And the librarians, this is staffed by professional librarians whose knowledge and ability to use resources is amazing. Former president of the New York Public Library, Timothy Healy, Dr. Timothy Healy, used to say, "Our greatest asset goes home," and by that he meant the librarians. So shout out to you, Denise, very valuable members of society. And so if you have any questions later or any time in your life, know that you have that resource open to you. So that brings the tour to an end, and now I'm open to questions.